Like, let's get into the nails. Because, well, hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm recording. Yeah, like, let's get into it. Okay. Today is the real moment of truth. Is today going to be serious? Is it? No, I think it has to be serious because I went to an event and I was recognized by someone who listens to this podcast, a follower. Her name is Noah. And then I was at this event and the other people I was talking to, they're like, oh my God, we're going to check out your podcast. And I feel like that puts a lot of pressure to maybe release something that's not complete nonsense because yes, I think all of the episodes are good, but I think if you tune in and you think that every episode is going to be like educational and not just me talking about nonsense, I think it could be quite jarring, right? Especially since we were having intellectual conversations. We were Matthew, no, this is vintage silk skirt. You can't sit on my lap. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome back to another glorious Monday. So I've been teasing for a while that I'm going to talk about that I've been planning some research for some different topics, and I really just, I have a couple things that I want to talk about, but ultimately it'll lead us to the road of the Myrtle Beach Safari, and you might be saying, why does that sound so familiar to me? And that's probably because in 2020, you watched Tiger King, right? Anybody who had a Netflix subscription or back in the good old days when Netflix wasn't so weird about password sharing, which they cannot gaslight me. I remember when they used to use all of their social media accounts to literally sit there, and pretend, sorry, if you're watching this on YouTube, I thought that I was going to get some footage of the cat, and then as soon as I tried to put the camera on him, he ran away, because I guess the camera can only be on him when he consents. I don't know, consent is king, go off boundaries. I'm so tired, that sentence didn't make sense. Anyway, the point is that I do want to talk about the animal abuse in the Myrtle Beach Safari, and first I think we have to go back to Tiger King. So if you will indulge me, go back to one of the worst times of being alive, aka quarantine 2020, and revisit the documentary that really captured America's attention, right? It was a perfect storm. It was a ridiculous Netflix documentary. We were trapped in the house, and it follows the murder for hire plot enacted by Joe Exotic, who was the owner of the GW Zoo in Oklahoma. It interviews, this sort of sordid cast of characters, many of whom were, criminals, people who were just kind of down and out in life. Joe Exotic essentially took in wayward characters and convinced them to work at his zoo. Mind you, these people had no accreditation or education to work with animals, and he had no business running the zoo. It was completely unregulated, unfettered animal abuse, particularly the abuse of tigers, who he bred for profit. There are more tigers in captivity in America than there are in the wild. That's all species of tigers. That's something very sobering, and because of the domestic American tiger trade, because for so long, right, it wasn't until a few years ago when the popularity of Tiger King and Carole Baskin, and trust me, we'll touch on her, passed the federal law, the Big Cats Act, which makes it illegal to own big cats without like the proper permitting, and you can't sell them, because even like 10-15 years ago, it was perfectly legal to get some tigers in your backyard, depending on the state where you lived. And yes, of course, the Southern American states had some very loose regulations around this. Get some tigers in your backyard, breed them, and then sell the cubs. And it was extremely profitable to have people go into malls, petting zoos, birthday parties, and play with these baby tigers, to the detriment of these cubs, right? It is not good for cubs that young to be handled. They're very violently separated from their mother, and the Tiger King documentary actually shows footage of, a tiger giving birth, and then immediately her babies are ripped away from her. They're bottle fed by keepers. They're not able to bond with their mother, which is really crucial for tiger development. I mean, think about how cruel it would be to take your domestic house cat, let's say your domestic house cat gives birth, and then immediately rip away the kittens from the mother. We consider that inhumane. What Joe Exotic was doing was cruel. It was abhorrent. I hated it. It was very difficult for me to watch the documentary the first time because of the animal abuse. But then randomly, like a month ago, I woke up and I was like, I think I have to see that again because I have some unresolved questions. So I went back and I watched the documentary, and it was painful and also very triggering for some other reasons, because what I had missed the first time sort of in the world was ending haze was how much the director, Eric Goode, and he has some, you know, questionable ethics that we'll get into, really glazed Joe Exotic to make this documentary. I don't want to give a recitation of all 8 episodes. I think at this point, I assume that you guys have all seen it. If not, you can go watch it on Netflix, where there's like 10-minute breakdowns on YouTube. And frankly, this is like a pet peeve, but I really, really hate when people are like, oh, I want to discuss this piece of media, and then they just recap the piece of media, and then that's it. And like, that's not discussing, that's just summarizing something. Right. But Joe Exotic, basically, he was convicted for animal abuse charges and also a murder hire plot against Carol Baskin, who ran Big Cat Rescue. Now, at the time of the documentary, Big Cat Rescue was a 501c3 organization that rescued big cats from situations like the GW Zoo. It had a very intricate volunteer system. And one thing I want to say, and this was one of the first issues on the rewatch that I really had with the documentary, they made it seem like it was crazy that that Big Cat Rescue utilized a tiered volunteer system to take care of the cats, and they didn't essentially have any paid staff. That's not really unusual in rescue situations. And I did go back and look on the website. They do have like paid veterinarians, and I think they did have like a couple of full-time staff members, but by and large, a lot of animal rescue organizations are propelled by the hard work and love of volunteers. And they made it seem like she was very crazy. Now, we have to get into it. Of course, when you hear Carol Baskin, you think Carol Baskin killed her husband, whacked him, and you think about like that TikTok dance. It's all like, the renegade, which I never learned to do. The documentary, in my opinion, had to paint Carol as a similar villain to Joe Exotic to normalize Joe Exotic's behavior. As a reminder, if it's been some years, the documentary tracks Joe Exotic as he engages in prolific animal abuse, right? We see that the tigers don't get veterinary care. They're not fed a proper diet. Some of the tigers, and I'll put this in the recommended reading, but some of the tigers that were rescued from that situation, they were taken to a sanctuary in Colorado. And in the interview, you'll see, it's like a 3-minute clip, so trust me, there will be another article. But in the 3-minute clip, the one of the workers of the sanctuary is saying that when the tigers came to them, they were all pretty thin. And that's because Joe Exotic was feeding them expired Walmart meat. So he had a deal with the local Walmart that all of their expired meat they can no longer sell, which may or may not technically be good to eat, he fed to the tigers. And he also fed that to his staff, who lived in dirty trailers on the property. And he was able to do so because he was taking people who were down on their luck, who really didn't have any other options in life, and just exploiting them terribly. And so he's feeding this tiger meat. They're not getting like fresh kills or good quality meat or even an adequate amount of food, right? Like, they would just dump a couple of steaks in the clips into an enclosure that had 5 or 6 grown adult tigers. And if you look at those pictures of the tigers in the GW Zoo when they were in prison there, and I'm using the word in prison there because it's fucking hell on earth. I get really worked up about animal abuse, as we're going to see in the next couple of episodes, because if I got too frantic in talking about this and missed it, I do want to talk about, I introduced that, the Myrtle Beach Safari, and then we're going to go into that, and that is the long-term research project that I've been working on. That and something about tween culture. Stay tuned. But again, we had to talk about a more ranty video about Tiger King. These tigers weren't getting adequate nutrition, right? We see that he's breeding them, you know, for profit. He's selling the cubs to people who have the same sort of animal welfare, and I use that word very loosely, standards as him. You know, he's in prison right now because he shot, I think, 4 to 6 tigers in the head, and he claimed it was euthanasia, but the bullet wounds were still in the skull. Probably because the tigers weren't profitable anymore, right? It is very expensive to house and feed grown adult tigers, and they don't bring in the same kind of profit from the, you know, zoo that a baby cub does. A baby cub is redundant. In addition to his nefarious relationship with animals, he also had some very, I think, extremely disturbing predatory sexual practices. So we're introduced to 2 of Joe Exotic's husbands, both of whom would not describe themselves as gay men before getting with Joe Exotic, and one who ended up surviving the relationship because his second husband, Travis, took his own life on the property, did not describe himself as wanting to be with men afterwards. And essentially, Joe Exotic went around trolling for attractive drug addicts, promised to supply them with drugs in exchange for a sexual and romantic relationship and housing at the GW Zoo, giving them a job. The documentary doesn't go into explicit detail because one thing Eric Goode made a point of doing, and again, it's the director of Tiger King, is that he tried to make Joe Exotic likable. That will be the recommended reading for this week. You know, he talks at length about cutting out the racism from Joe Exotic's everyday speech and from the other, you know, workers at the GW Zoo property, because yes, obviously they were racist. I mean, this is rural Oklahoma, people engaging in just profoundly ignorant shit. Like, yeah, the N-word was flying out of their mouth. These are not good people. But he had to really downplay the coercion and rape that is interwoven within his story. His first husband, John, and let me just Google that to make sure I'm remembering that correctly, had lost his teeth from meth that Joe Exotic was supplying to him, right? Oh wait, no, it's Travis Maldonado, Dylan Passage, Jorge Flores. I'm Googling it now. He has 6 husbands, and the one on Tiger King is, yeah, it was John Finlay. Sorry for the detour. But John Finlay, during the Tiger King documentary, is slowly losing all of his teeth, right? At the beginning of the documentary, and Eric Goode followed them around for a few years, he has more of his teeth, but he never has a full set, and by the end, he's missing almost all of them due to meth use. And when Tiger King exploded, he ended up getting a new set of teeth. He worked with some local dentists who gave them for free. And he also talked about the extent of his drug use, and he was using drugs pretty hardcore. And while he did say that Joe was using them with them, Joe was not as dependent on the substances as John and Travis were. It's a very disturbing dynamic that I think also went unrecognized because it was a homosexual relationship and the abuse was perpetuated by a comedic figure. Like, I think people had a hard time reconciling that Joe Exotic was very entertaining and very funny to watch, and also that he was engaging in sexual abuse by basically saying, like, if you want drugs, you know, you have to be into me, you have to pretend to be into me, you have to, you know, call me your husband and I'm going to tattoo my name on your genitals and your most intimate areas to lay claim and ownership to your body. And so I say all of that because Joe Exotic really was a dastardly character, and if he hadn't been given I think if a more neutral documentarian who actually cared about documentary ethics and not also perpetuated by someone who's kind of affiliated with this sort of animal world or just like animal abuse, which we'll get into that more when we talk about the Myrtle Beach safari. But you should know that Eric Goode made a follow-up documentary called Chimp Crazy, which I also watched, about a woman named Tanya who keeps an adult male chimpanzee, Tonka, who you might recognize from a couple of Hollywood movies, most notably a movie with Alan Cummings. And she keeps this chimp alone, isolated in his own feces in a little room in her basement. It was about as big as, a studio apartment's bathroom. I mean, just depressingly small, something that I, a 5'2" woman, would feel uncomfortable in. And I can't imagine what type of hell that was for the chimp. And many people raised some sort of, some ethical issues with the way that he approached his subject. He ends up lying to the subject of the documentary, Tanya, using a proxy director, a man who is also heavily affiliated and very deeply sympathetic to the animal world, to get her to agree to become a subject. And then he watches for months as this woman keeps this chimp in the basement, knowing that PETA is looking for this animal, knowing that there are federal court orders against her to produce Tonka or evidence that he's dead, because Tanya claims, well, Tonka, that's a chimp, died and I can no longer find him. And she sends what's essentially like brownie mix to PETA and says, test the remains. Because these are Tonka's remains. Tonka now lives in a very nice sanctuary, I believe in Florida, and he's actually formed a close bond with his children. One of his sons also lives at the property. Tonka was valuable to Tanya because of breeding. Again, this is a failure of Eric Goode to not be blunt, or to really question Tanya or investigate further. Tanya insists that Tonka is so valuable to her because of their bond, and they have a real affinity for the other. And while that may be true, and while it did seem like she was delusional about her love for Tonka, it also can't be denied that male chimps are valuable because of their breeding capabilities, right? Female chimps, like humans, gestate for, a long period of time, close to a year. And they only give birth to about 1 or 2 children. Male chimps can continue to reproduce, can continue to impregnate other females, and much like the breeding of horses, the breeding of, the illegal exotic animal trade has very much to do with the pedigree of the parent. This Tonka, who is not only featured in Hollywood movies, but if you pick up a Hallmark greeting card and it's a chimp, it's usually one of 3 chimps that were originally owned by a woman named Connie and her fake ass animal rescue that has now been thankfully shut down by PETA in Georgia. Connie originally owned Tonka, then Tanya purchased Tonka from Connie. What keeps this business going, what makes the sale of these chimps so, or really any exotic animal so lucrative, is that you're able to breed them, right? And so his sperm could command a very, very high price on the black market. Breeding him commands a very high price. In the Chimp Crazy documentary, Eric Goode films Tanya taking the chimp to another sort of shady animal sanctuary. And again, I say that word loosely. People file fraudulent papers and pass themselves off as a charitable organization and do the bare minimum to get a permit from the state. Like, I live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Getting a permit for exotic animal ownership, it's not easy. It's not difficult. It's like a level 4 difficulty. And if I really wanted to do it, I could pull it off in like a year. And then there's no like regulating body that comes and checks up on the animals. Like it has to be an animal welfare issue for, animal authorities to get involved. And so Tanya takes Tonka to the sanctuary and she makes it seem like, he was just helping me hide Tonka. Bullshit. The sanctuary, and again, bullshit ass sanctuary that she took Tonka to, was filled with female chimps, some of whom have been rescued and who were pregnant. She was using the chimp to breed, right? I give this little recitation about Chimp Crazy to say that brought up some ethical issues, and the point that I was trying to make is that Eric Goode gave an interview where he talked about the fact that he didn't really know if he thought that it was inappropriate to be owning these wild animals, which is probably why he's so sympathetic to his subjects. So whenever you see the portrayal of Carole Baskin, and look, there's no doubt that she's weird, and there's no doubt that something is weird about the disappearance of her husband. She was in her early 20s when she got with a much older Don Baskin, a businessman who had a family and who left that family, and his ex-wife is still, particularly even in the documentary, enamored with him, to get with Carole Baskin, who he found walking on the side of the road in a part of town that after the documentary was released, locals would swear is where prostitution occurs. Okay, it seems like they met under shady circumstances. She was a very beautiful young woman, and then they got into the exotic animal trade, which I think is a very valid criticism of Carole Baskin. I mean, the hypocrisy to make a bunch of money selling and trading exotic animals, and then to decide that you are going to start a rescue foundation that coincidentally you also live on the property and you can view the animals at all time. I mean, it does suggest that as much as she loves cats, her motives were not completely altruistic, and that she simply morphed into a socially acceptable way to continue to maintain ownership, custody, and control of these animals, because the appeal of these big cats, these chimps, these, very exotic, dangerous wild animals is the feeling of saying, like, I conquer the wild, right? It's the same reason why people will climb mountains that they have no business climbing on or try to conquer nature. Man has always been in conflict with itself, and the idea that we're not part of the natural world. One of my favorite classes that I ever took in college was a philosophy seminar about the human animal, and really going into depth about the way that we see ourselves so separate from nature. It dates back to Abrahamic religions, the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, that prescribes man and gives dominion over the earth and the animals to man, instead of recognizing our part as mammals in this ecosystem and recognizing the awesome responsibility that we have as very intelligent beings to be stewards of the earth and to be stewards and caregivers to other animals, what we've done to the earth. And our animal brethren is monstrous, and it sounds like something out of colonial times and people getting on boats to go, just completely massacre unsuspecting populations. But it truly is something that you see all the time. For some people, it's not enough that we have domesticated animals like modern day cats and dogs. I'm laughing and staring at my cat who's loafing on my crafts. And that they are dependent on us, and that we have this. I get so much, for as much as I make fun of Matthew on my podcast, he's the love of my life. He means so much to me. He's one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I constantly tell people, adopt a cat, and please adopt an older cat from the shelter because they need you the most. Matthew went unadopted because he was fat and black and 4, so he wasn't a kitten, and people thought his snaggle teeth were ugly. I think he's the cutest thing on earth. Many people think you're very cute, right, Matthew? I mean, he doesn't speak English, so he can't answer. Or dogs, they have to go and they have to have wolves and they have to have tigers and they have to have these very extreme things, because the more extreme the animal that you conquer, the more that it does for someone's ego, which is rampantly on display in Tiger King. And so Carole Baskin has to be painted as this equally crazy figure, to normalize Joe Exotic, a man who is glaringly a narcissist, insecure, evil for what he was doing to those animals, and evil to what he was doing to men, and the predatory nature, and also his predatory employment. I mean, essentially, there's a scene where he finds a woman at a gas station who's homeless, has nothing She's not well taken care of. You can tell that she's in need of some pretty dire medical care, and she's clearly in a very unstable situation, and he offers her a job. Well, someone who's indebted to you like that, one, is going to do anything to remain an employee because they know that what they're facing is homelessness if they don't. And two, you can continue to abuse them because they'll tolerate a lot more if you know that you have nowhere to go, nothing else to do, and you're also forming an intense emotional bond with these animals, because I don't want to discredit. Evil is very complex, and I don't think that a lot of the people who were working at the GW Zoo truly understood what they were doing was really fucking evil, to take these beautiful, wild, regal creatures and force them into inbreeding, right? Many, if not most, domestic tigers at this point are so severely inbred. Keep in mind that there's about 4 species of tiger in captivity. There's Asian tigers, or there's tigers from different parts of Asia, and they're just sort of melding them together, and that's why they're so a bit weird looking, right? You've probably seen a white tiger on your For You page, probably from the Myrtle Beach Safari. We'll get into that next week. White tigers in captivity are inbred. There was one white tiger in the 1950s who was forced to mate with a regular colored tiger, and then forced to mate with its offspring, and then the white colored offspring were meant to interbreed. The health problems of white tigers are severe and oftentimes catastrophic. They have extremely short lifespans, even when compared to their more inbred peers. They have cognitive defects, they have physical health defects. I mean, everything that you can imagine. Think about a Habsburg jaw in a white tiger, but because they look so beautiful and visually appealing, these little roadside zoos, these unaccredited institutions, are eager to continue to torture tigers. And this is the part where I get on my soapbox and say that people's inability to rock with this argument really depends on whether or not you think certain dog breeds should exist. Certain dog breeds have just been bred to the point of cruelty, right? Brachycephalic dogs, like pugs, English bulldogs, certain bully breeds. Brachycephalic refers to the skull and almost that like smush and nose shape, because of unregulated breeding, and also because of the demand for these species. People like to pretend that even the most ethical breeders of these species are not also contributing to the problem, but the reality is that the human desire for these animals cannot keep up. Corners have to be cut to keep up with the demand, and the supply is to the detriment of these animals, many of whom do not lead good quality of lives. They're in pain, they have many health issues. Again, the issues of inbreeding because of these unregulated backyard breeders, Amish puppy farms. And I find that if you're a person who gets defensive to that argument, if you look at certain dog breeds or even certain cat breeds, because a Scottish fold cat, the cats that Taylor Swift has, those shouldn't be bred. One, again, they're extremely brachycephalic. Two, the reason why they're so cute, their little folded ears, is because they don't have cartilage. And so human beings hundreds of years ago decided that it was so cute that they have these floppy little ears, but that lack of cartilage in their ears it's not just a lack of cartilage in the ears, it's a lack of cartilage all over the bodies, which means they're prone to very, very early arthritis, often starting immediately after kittenhood. Scottish folds are known for being lethargic, but vets now know that it's because they're in so much pain, right? They're not as playful as other cats, not because they have demure, laid-back personalities, but because it's physically painful. Imagine how much your personality would differ if every step was painful, if it was hard to get out of bed. They often don't live as long as other cats. Cats, especially smaller cats like a Scottish fold, they can live to like 18, 19, 20. Now 20 is pretty unusual for a cat, but most cats get to their mid-teens. Scottish folds don't live that long. They're very beautiful, they're very kind, they're very sweet, but again, the breathing problems, the arthritis, the health issues caused by the lack of cartilage, and the amount of pain that they live in is It is unethical to say that your desire to want a cutie little patootie in your house outweighs how fucked up it is to continue to breed a living creature and doom them to a life of pain. That's cruel, right? It's one of my more controversial opinions. I'm constantly fighting with my friends about this, especially if one time a friend made the mistake and they were like, I'm gonna get this breed of dog, and then for days I get you can tell that I'm worked up in this episode. I'm very passionate about animal rights. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like I love animals. Like if we were to ever go to the zoo together, which there is a difference between the GW Zoo and highly accredited zoos. Shout out to the Philly Zoo for having the highest level of accreditation, really great animal enrichment. But I can tell you facts about all the animals. I fall asleep to animal documentaries. I watch animal documentaries in all my free time. Like I love animals. I love being able to see them in the wild. There are certain animals that I know I'll never get to see in person in this lifetime, but just to be able to experience them on a screen is so magical. And I do think it would be awesome to like, I mean, tigers look pretty cute. I do want to pet one, but it's wrong, you know? And so your ability to really buy into this entire podcast episode is whether or not you think it's fucked up to have certain breeds of dogs. Also kind of by the same extent, whether or not you think it's fucked up to allow an animal to live in pain. Quick divergence to a law school story because some people have been asking for them. The law school that I went to, we were in my civil procedure class. We were having a conversation about physician-assisted suicide. I have no idea why this came up in Civ Pro, by the way. Like civil procedure is about like the federal rules of civil procedure, which are the rules that govern as the name suggests, civil procedure, like litigation, right? And for some reason we were talking about physician-assisted suicide, and I was the only person who raised my hand in support of it. And then the kid in front of me freaked out and told the story about how his friend took their own life, which is devastating for that friend and for that kid. But then it put me in a real awkward, it was like a Curb Your Enthusiasm moment where then the professor was like, well, do you want to respond to that? And I was like, no. And then I still had to. And then I tried to liken it to like, well, you know, when your dog is in pain and it's just cruel to let your dog like languish with those conditions. And I thought more people would be on my side then. No, it turns out a lot of people have some very controversial opinions about keeping your dog alive when it's in pain and suffering just because you want to hang out with the dog. And it's like, yeah, but how much enjoyment can you really get from your dog when they're like, you know, riddled with tumors, screaming in pain? You have to give them like sedatives all the time. Like, loving someone is recognizing that death is release. Got very dark very fast. Sorry. Anyway, I love animals. I'm very passionate about animals, and I was disappointed that the most popular form of Tiger King media, and there was also a great podcast by Wondery that is now no longer publicly available. So really standing the 5-year test of time with Tiger King is really just this bullshit documentary that does not want to delve into animal abuse, does not want to delve into the personal and sexual abuses of Joe Exotic, does not want to delve into perhaps the foundation of the Big Cat Rescue. And oh, one thing I forgot to add, Big Cat Rescue has shipped off all the cats to other sanctuaries. It's now functionally closed as a sanctuary for animals, although it still operates in like conservation work and advocacy, especially legislative advocacy for big cats, but it no longer has like a premises where cats are housed. And I think it could have been really interesting to have that conversation and to segue it into more of, again, a lot of animal conservation agencies, just because of the lack of regulation and because of lack of public information, and people are willing to overlook a lot to be able to be around their favorite animal, are getting away with some pretty gross abuses of animals. And it wasn't that. Instead, it kind of hamped up the salacious nature of Don Baskin's death. if you did your research after the documentary, you would know that, one, he was allegedly caught up in some pretty shady things. It seemed like he was moving drugs for some pretty bad people. Also, he was prone to disappearing, and he had talked at length about wanting to disappear. Again, could she have done something to him? Probably. Do I think that that amounted to the other cast of characters, many of whom were also sexually predatory men? I'm kind of interested why the documentary wanted us to walk away with that conclusion, right? It was disappointing to me to see so much disturbing footage. I mean, it's completely glossed over that Joe Exotic probably murdered his own alligators. He was in the process of filming a reality show with sort of a offbeat former news host and wannabe reality TV producer. And when the walls began to close in on a civil lawsuit with Carole Baskin, and as part of the judgment, they began to demand his assets and footage to satisfy the judgment, he blows up where the facility, like the small shack where the footage was kept, which is also where living alligators were housed. The warehouse, the alligator warehouse, burned down, killing all of the alligators, and I presume they're alligators because in the documentary, the people working at the GW Zoo are so unqualified that they keep calling them crocodilians. It's not a fucking species. But either the alligator or crocodile house is burned down, and Joe Exotic spends that episode basically feigning remorse, and he's like, my footage. Do you think that he ever addresses the fact that the animals died terribly? They burned to death or they were suffocated. Neither is a quick death, neither is a merciful death by people who sought out to protect them, right? The only time he talks about the loss of these creatures is when he's trying to put on some public performance to raise money to reopen the facility. And it's this disregard for the animals that they claim to love, which is where I really can't feel any sympathy. Much like the example I gave about Tanya and keeping a chimp in just derelict conditions in her basement. How can you claim to love something and know that you are torturing it? Especially going back to the Chimp Crazy documentary, she constantly refers to Tonka as a humanzy, half chimp, half human, and says that he has a more human side and he's like a human. How could you ever justify keeping a human in those conditions and claim that you love it? And instead, Tiger King focuses on this cult of personality. It venerates sexually dangerous figures like Doc Antle, who again will be the subject of next week's episode. And it tries to discredit the murder for hire plot at the expense of focusing on animal abuse. I just wanted to get these preliminary thoughts out of the way because as I'm filming different segments and sort of, conducting the research for the Myrtle Beach Safari, I want to be able to use this as a point to just kind of get my grievances off with the way that I really struggle to find any comprehensive media that really tackles the gross abuses of these places without falling into the trap of almost the cult of personality that these people offer. As funny and as engaging as Joe Exotic was to watch, in the backdrop of all of that footage are abused, sick, and helpless creatures. Some of whom were executed at his hand, many others who will never seek justice, who lived miserable lives in inadequate cages with no enrichment, eating dirty, disgusting meat, being cared for by people who probably thought they were well-meaning but who had no qualifications to work with animals, let alone exotic animals like that, and who spent every minute of their lives being milked for profitability, being ripped away from their mother, being tortured, being set up in these inhumane zoo conditions. One thing that separates a good zoo from a bad zoo is that all good zoos give the animals opportunity to get refuge from the humans. That's why zoos have limited hours, and it's why sometimes you pass an exhibit and you don't see an animal there, and it's because they have the choice to walk away from the stimulation of people. Those animals in the GW Zoo never got that. They didn't get adequate shelter. They didn't get medical care. They were cooed at and gawked at, inappropriately touched and handled, just so that one sociopath, narcissist, could make a buck. So thank you for traveling on a blast to the past with me. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm really excited for next week. I'll see you next time. Loves ya. Bye. Mwah. All right, y'all, that's it. I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me rant, as always. Mwah.